Hello, friends. Welcome, fellow trauma survivors, and welcome, friends of trauma survivors. I'm Holly Elissa Bruno, and 5 years ago, I wrote a book, and the book was called Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You, translating trauma's harsh legacy into healing. And ever since then, we've been meeting online to have a safe place for trauma survivors to come together and share every week how we are living our lives fully, including the fact that we acknowledge that we're trauma survivors and we don't deny it. And so I'm very happy that for the last, I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a wonderful amount of time. Denise Rokicki and I have been working together as fellow trauma survivors, and we've renamed this program Two Trauma Survivors Walking Each Other Home. And actually, it's trauma survivors walking each other home, because when you join us, it's more than two, but it's two or more gathered. And we like to hope and believe that healing things happen here. So here's our two things before we get started. One, we want this to be a safe space for you and for us. And so when Denise starts speaking and sharing who she is in a minute, she'll let you know how to keep the space safe. I'll just say for me that as a survivor, I need to talk about how I feel. I need to be respectful to myself, and I need to be respectful to the, boundaries of others. So I will be aiming to do that. And we'll talk more specifically about that. But the other thing is, I believe that the truth sets me free. So within the boundaries of respecting you and respecting me, I'll be sharing some truths. And what we invite you to do is, if you want to, we've had this program go many ways. One is when people actually come on and join us. We'd love to have you do that. Another is you come on and you join us through the chat and we respond that way. And a third way is after the fact, you give us feedback and we respond. So whatever way works for you, we'd be glad to have you with us. So today is our first time gathering in March, because we meet every Monday afternoon on the East Coast of the US at 3, which means when we were originating in England, we met at 8 p.m. In England. So that's a bit about who we are. And each week we simply talk about what's going on in the week and what's helping us, what's getting in our way, and how we're finding ways to support each other. How can Denise and I help each other walk each other home, given the struggles that are going on in our world, in our lives, inside of us, outside of us? So welcome. Glad you're here. And Denise Rokicki, what would you like to say to folk who are with us?
Good afternoon. So one thing that we like to tell folks is, if you get triggered while you're here, you can just open your phone and touch Google and say trauma warm line, and someone will be there to support you. Or you can message either one of us if you want to chat that way. We're both on Facebook pretty regularly, and we will respond to you that way. And drink water.
Why does water help, Denise?
It's one of the healing elements in our world.
It is. It's clear. We hope it's clean. We hope it's unadulterated. And for me, it's a moment. And as we go through today, and as we go through every one of these programs, I invite us each to just say out loud, what's a tip? What's a tip for trauma survivors? And for me, self-care is one of the hardest things to learn. And what do I mean by self-care? I mean, I was taught to put everybody else's needs before my own. My mother was a beautiful but troubled lady. And I knew, really, I swear I knew from birth that she was unable to take care of me. She had mental health, severe mental health challenges. And I knew my job. In fact, my father, who was a narcissist, let me know my job was to keep her from slipping down into mental illness. So I could tell you in a heartbeat how my mother was feeling. I could tell you when she was getting stressed. I could tell you when she was getting close to losing it. I could do all kinds of things to cheer her up. But if you ask me what I loved when I was a child, number one, I wouldn't feel safe to tell you because speaking of myself wasn't safe. And number two, I'm not sure I could tell you what I loved because I was raised to be needless and wantless. And Denise can address that too. I find that to be a trait of trauma survivors. We're so focused on mirrors. I was so focused on surviving and taking care of people that I thought would otherwise hurt, harm, even destroy me. My father was quite violent, that I didn't even have time to imagine taking care of myself. All I could think of to do was to just do whatever I had to do within the four walls of that house, which were very destructive for me and unsafe, and get outside. And then I got outside, I felt safe. I felt safe. So one of our tips, and tips is like a very sort of blow it off term. One of the things that has mattered to me deeply is admitting and owning that I need to take care of myself, that I didn't learn to take care of myself, and that each time I do take care of myself, it's not time wasted. It's time that's really important. So
It's
let's start
building
off with that.
it's building the neurons in our brain of I take care of myself because we didn't build them when we were supposed to. And so now, we have to build them.
Yeah, tell us more about that, Denise. What's it like when a child doesn't build those, and how do you help a child build those?
With, safe routines, safe, comforting routines of washing your hands, brushing your teeth, using the bathroom, eating healthy foods. The things that we should do, we know now as adults, but we didn't know when we were kids. So, we were probably dehydrated all the time and undernourished. And you're right, we were not to have any needs,
What an
zero
amazing
needs.
zero needs, honey. What an amazing message that is to a child, isn't it? I mean, how do
Yeah,
you Denise worked for 30 something years and still does with young children and has really worked hard on learning about not just neurodiverse children. Those are wonderful children to know about, but every child, every child. How does a child develop? And I look to her for a lot of insights on how to do that because of her experience and her strength in that. And I'm just wondering, Denise, what does it do to a child when the child is taught from birth, I don't want to hear from you?
well, it delays their language development, number one, if, they're not heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, neglect is horrible. And honestly, it's kind of like psychological abuse, like physical abuse, sexual abuse. You know it, you feel it, you see it, you experience it. But emotional abuse and neglect, which I guess they're kind of the same, is harder to put your finger on. And you really have to search to figure out what it was, what messages that you received that were incorrect, from the world around you, which is I'm not worthy, I'm not worth it. Uh, and we do tend to put the needs of others before us,
So
which
you've
is
covered a, yeah, go
it's
ahead.
nice, which it's nice to do that. It's
Mm-hmm.
nice to you're a nice person, but it's not a genuine from the heart service or gift. It's a obligation.
I hear you, hon. Janice, you've covered a lot for us there. And I think one of the major issues you identified is let's talk about neglect and not just abuse. Um, I often, because I'm a survivor of abuse and neglect, I more often talk about abuse because it was visible, it was seeable, and it makes me believable. But the neglect for me added up to abandonment. And I know that abandonment, when a child feels unseen, unheard, and unwanted, that child from birth can be a failure to thrive baby. You can give the baby all she needs in terms of food, but if she doesn't feel like anybody wants her there, her heart feels that, and she becomes a failure to thrive child. So that's how
I
important
think I
it is.
was a failure to thrive.
Say
But
more.
it was my sister who's younger than me who told me that. And so sometimes that's not reliable information. But I think I was born at a very low birth weight. And then I had to go back, I think, to the hospital because I didn't gain weight.
Yeah, that would be the indicator. Has your mom ever told you about that?
No, and nor have I asked her. Hmm.
Is that something that, well, I
That's
mean,
not,
you,
no, I wouldn't ask her about it.
okay. And that's part of being a survivor, right?
Right. We have to protect others, the family, whatever, that where we belong
I,
so
re-
that we can still belong.
yeah, because that need to belong is crucial to our identities. And my father lived to be almost 101 years old. And I remember being with him in that last decade. And I was doing a lot of work as a trauma survivor. And there were times when I would just want to confront him. I just want to confront him. And yet, every time I wanted to do that, I realized, and this is something I need to talk about, I realized it was not going to be appropriate and it was not going to be productive.
Right.
And I stopped myself. And yet I continued to do all the work I could to recover. Now, my question is, or was I taking care of him or was I taking care of me or both of us? Was I afraid of what would happen if I confronted him? And the answer to that question is yes. There was a time I remember. Unfortunately, my daughter as a teenager was sitting in the car and my father was being very abusive to me on the speakerphone. And I said to him, this is not appropriate. And I'm not allowing this. And he said, well, you're acting like a CEO. Who do you think you are? And the thing is, I was a CEO at the time,
Right.
and I said, well, anyway, here's the thing. I was very frank with him, and I said, yes, I feel you're being disrespectful to me, and I don't allow that. And I'm with my daughter, and you and I can talk about this at another time. And I was really feeling pumped up at that. I was
Right. That's
enraged,
very bold.
very old feeling. And also with my daughter being there, I felt like I needed to protect her. Anyway, I ended the call and she said to me, I said, Lils, how did you feel about that? And she said, I didn't know that Grandpa Jim was like that. His name was Vincenzo, but he had an anglicized name, James William. Anyway, she said, I didn't know he was like that. And I realized later in reflecting on that I was trying to protect my children
Right.
from knowing what had happened. I mean, what child wants to hear my mother was a victim of incest? My mother was beaten by her father. I wanted my children to have a relationship with them. Of course, I was always around. Once I caught on, I was always around. But I wanted my children to have grandparents. And I don't think I would have done it today. If I were in that situation, I would do it differently than I did then. But I needed to belong and I wanted them to feel like they had a home, particularly because they were not biological. They were my children, but in my family, they weren't seen. My father was all about birthright. And they weren't seen as his grandchildren. I really wanted to make sure that they were seen that way. So, yeah, this was tough. The neglect hurts as much as the physical beating, and it's hard to talk about because we're often not believed when we do talk about it.
Right. I think it hurts worse, because you can't put your finger on it. You can't
Yeah.
exactly say what phrase made you feel that way or what look or what, it's just that you learn you're not worthy. You're not worth it. You're not valuable, or you're only valuable for certain things. It's hard.
Right. And those certain things are usually not what we would
Appropriate.
choose. They're not
Right.
appropriate. They're in fact abusive.
Yeah.
What
They're
we're talking about here.
parentified,
Right.
adultified.
Yeah, as adult children of dysfunctional families are, as Denise said, parentified. Tell us for people that might not be familiar with that, what does that mean, being a parentified child? And
Well,
how did
like
that apply to you?
to me, I took care of my siblings a lot when I, should have been a kid, I believe. And and for you, you took care of your mother,
Right.
which I kind of,
Did you do that too?
I think so, yeah.
I think you did indirectly by freeing her up from her motherly duties. You became the mom to your siblings.
Right. A lot of times.
You were putting them to bed, right?
Probably, yeah. And
Were you?
mostly watching them during the day,
hmm
when they should have been watched.
Or played with, or talked to, or what did that free your mother up to do, or to be?
Yeah, she went to Vic Tanny's a lot, which that was an exercise place. They went bowling, 3, 4 times a week. Bingo. They went out to that. My mom was did a lot of social things.
Yeah. What I realized about my mom is she didn't know how to be a mother. Is that true for your mom?
Um, I think my mom just didn't really enjoy it. You know,
Okay.
she, it was like way too mundane for her.
Ah, that's another
She
thing.
wanted a more glamorous existence. Not even glamorous, but social, exercising with your friends, going to the beauty shop, bingo, all kinds of do active.
That's true. Back in the day in the 50s and 60s, 70s, 80s, moms went to get their hair done at the beauty salon like once a week.
Yeah, my mom went once a week.
Yeah. My mother went down the street to a woman named Cappy, and Cappy would uh, spray her hair and put her hair in and my mother would like wrap something around her hair to keep it like that,
Right. They
for the
had to
whole.
make it last all week. They were kind of like updos, or like when we took dance class, my sisters and I and my brother did too. We took dance classes, and once a year there would be a recital, and we would get to go to the beauty shop and get our hair up. You know,
What was that like?
fun. I liked
Oh,
it.
was it? Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I didn't get my hair done until I was in junior high or high school and going to a prom. And then it was only acceptable, or I was only sent because that's what was expected. And, I had no idea what to say to a hairdresser. And so she would, God, I didn't know. When I remember when my daughter was getting married, she had looked in magazines. She knew exactly how she wanted her hair to be coiffed. She was really clear about it. And she brought, all of that. I had no idea my mother used to cut my hair with the scissors. She used to cut all of our hair with scissors, and it would just go like that. And I never had someone shape my hair, style my hair. Never. Really. Not even when I was in college. I just grew it long and cut it like that. I think it was only when I went to law school and I met friends who were going to hairdressers that I said, you know what, I'm a professional here. I need to get some help. So I started finding my own hairdressers, and it was a whole sisterly process of asking people, so your hair looks great. Who do you go to? And that's like, I was 20 something years old, Denise.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to flip here, guys. So I'm going to enter talking about sexuality. So boundaries up. I'm not going to talk specifically, but I'm just going to say that I went to a college reunion, and my college was all female. And we played a lot at this reunion. And we had my roommate and I were doing facilitating a sort of research. And we were saying, so at your tables, let's do an analysis of what age we were when we said goodbye to our virginity. And we were at our college for 4 years. So how many of us, at what year? And so there was somebody taking the statistics down at each table, and each table reported. I was one of the few people that made it all the way through those 4 years of undergraduate school as a virgin. And there were others of us too. And that was the way I was raised. You know, there was just one of the things about being a trauma survivor is that there was no helping me understand about development. There was no understanding about development. I guess Dr. Spock's book came out, but my mother never looked at that. It was considered radical. So there was no understanding that at maybe 2 years old, it was okay, kids bit. No, it was just you bite, you get smacked. There was no understanding about teenage years and what girls need to know. There was just a horrible book called The Facts of Life for Teenagers that was in the library. Not that we had a library, it was in the bookshelf. And it was just there because we were supposed to figure it out. If we needed it, that's where we went to. And I went to that. And it said stuff like, don't go swimming if you've got your period. Don't exercise if you've got your period. All of this crapola, you know? So one of the things we haven't talked about, Denise, we haven't talked about two things. One is how powerful neglect is. You've raised that.
Yes.
Thank you. And the other thing is how lacking, and this is part of the neglect, how lacking in awareness our caregivers were about child development. They had no clue about what was appropriate for a 5-year-old. What should a 6-year-old be doing? We just got sent off to school, and it was assumed that the nuns or the teachers would know what was going on. I'm not sure they had either.
And both of us went to elementary school before there was any special ed teachers or any occupational therapists or physical therapists. That was non-available.
There was no help. I mean, what I think I remember, but it's very hush-hush, is that if people were really troubled, they got put elsewhere. I don't remember in elementary school that there was a special room for people who were, and it wasn't even special needs then, there were far more despicable terms used for those kids. I don't think they even got to go to the schools.
Mostly they didn't. They were isolated in either institutions or schools specifically for that.
And a lot of those were boarding schools?
Maybe, which would be institutionalized.
You got it. Well, the one woman I knew, the young woman, the girl that I knew was I would be with her every school vacation because she was the sister of someone in my class, and she was sight impaired. And she was sent off to a boarding school for the blind. That's what it was called then. And I really liked her. I liked having conversations with her. I guess I just met her once and I felt a bond with her. Of course, two children who were in some ways not fitting where we were. She got sent off, and my father would send me off to the pantry saying, get her out of my sight. So, yeah, here we are talking about two heavy things. One is neglect, and the other is the neglect that comes from parents being unaware of child development.
Which that's one of the beautiful things about Head Start is
Yeah.
that there's parent training available. I mean, our parents did not have parenting books. Now you can state a specific problem with it, that you're observing to Google, and they will diagnose you or whatever, diagnose your kid, or, you know,
So
explain things.
how does that work? Supposing that there's somebody listening right now that says, wow, I never studied child development and I raised my own kids. Wait a minute. If my grandchild is if my
Biting, for
grandchild is
example, you
violent,
gave the example
okay.
of biting. You
So
can
what do you
say,
do?
what can I do for a biting toddler?
Mm-hmm.
And they
Or
will,
even, is it appropriate? Like my toddler's biting, is that okay?
right. Which actually is, biting feels good. That was the first thing I learned from a physical therapist was
Mm.
biting feels good. Like if, yeah, I mean, it feels good to your jaw. Uh, so what we originally tried was find something that's appropriate to bite.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And
So
that's
what
what
was that? Like a carrot or something? How'd you do that?
they had toys actually, squishy things that were really almost like dog chews, similar to that.
Mm-hmm. And you said that's one of the first things you tried. So you didn't end up with that, or is that something you stayed with?
I just remember I really didn't have that many biters in my world, but because I'm not a toddler, I was always 4 and 5 year olds.
Mm-hmm.
Then I expanded down to 3 year olds, which I never really had biters. But when I was in Richmond, Virginia, I was in a special ed classroom, and there was a
Was
kid
that
that was a biter. And
was that multi-age when you were working with those kids?
yeah, that was 3, 4, and 5 year olds. I was preparing them for Head Start, actually,
Wow, that's so
because their
cool.
Head Start was closed that year because they were out of compliance.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I got a job with the public school and was preparing these kids to go to Head Start next year.
So the child that was a biter at age 3,
Yeah, we
and
gave them something to bite on, which it was, if I remember correctly, it looked like a pacifier, only it
okay.
was bigger and hard, more hard rubber. So it felt good to bite it, and you just learned to bite that instead of people.
I'm wondering what it is. There must be, I mean, let's just look at this for a moment, unpack it, as they say. What would feel good about biting? Well, for one thing, to eat food that we love, we chew it, we bite it,
Right,
right? So there's
right,
an association with something that we like. That's one thing. Another thing is if I bite down on something, the energy from my jaw, which can be pretty strong, right? It's like I forget the poundage that our jaws can do, but that energy has a place to go. And for traumatized children, a lot of us hold our breath and our jaw gets locked,
yep,
right? In fact, my jaw, I clear it all the time. I don't know if you can hear that, but wow, because it was just frozen. I wasn't allowed to speak. I wasn't allowed to share, and I've held my
right,
breath to survive. So there are two things that biting something would do. One, there'd be association with something positive, like getting something to eat, and two, it would be releasing the energy into something that could absorb the energy.
right,
And three, it would be acceptable because it wouldn't be harming someone else.
right. If you're biting something instead of a
Mm-hmm.
friend.
And in fact, what I was told when my son was a biter, and he persisted as a biter for beyond age 2, is that he was trying to express himself. And at first, the preschool teachers would say to him, use words. But if he didn't have words to use, he couldn't use words, but he could
Right.
tell somebody, I'm angry. You're getting attention when I want it. I'm going to get attention however I can. And so the understanding teachers that he had helped him work that through, and he got over biting. But that was hard. It's hard when you're pre-verbal and you're biting.
Right.
So talking about neglect, we got into this because we're talking about neglect. If a child is neglected or a child's needs aren't even noticed by their families, how does that add into being a traumatized child?
Well, we don't feel lovable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if neglect happens, we don't believe we deserve love.
Don't feel worthy of love, right?
Right. Yeah, all
Don't
those type of things. And we don't expect love for ourselves.
Right. And I was just saying to someone, it's a 12-step saying, it's this, Denise, it's an expectation is a resentment waiting to happen.
Right. Right.
Does that
And we
apply
have that,
to, yeah. So give us an example if you can.
Uh, yeah, we don't expect goodness for ourselves. Any, any goodness really. As a young, still traumatized person, but then we have to
Mhm.
learn. We have to learn to notice our desire and feel worthy of achieving that desire.
I'm smiling because often on this program, we get down to things like this. For example, when we talk about anger, I've been going through decades of learning how to deal with anger. And just today, I'm dealing with my response to a person that was angry at me. And, I have a adult child, I have a trauma survivor's response. Then I have all kinds of ways of being mature and dealing with it. And when you've talked about it, you often talk about that's the feeling I don't want to get close to. That's the feeling I don't want to really be involved with. So
Right.
anger is a big deal when it comes to neglect. What would neglect and anger, feeling anger, have to do with each other?
Well, we're not allowed to feel angry. In my house, I had a sister just younger than I, 11 months or 13 months, something. And she was very emotional and very expressive and angry a lot. So it was annoying to me. It was disruptive. It was, and my mom role modeled it too. We don't like that. That's not good. That's icky, all that emotion. And so, my sister was traumatized by that, by not being allowed to have her feelings or by being ridiculed for having those big, big feelings. And
And yet, in the end, if I've heard your story right, she got help, whereas you didn't.
she did get help as a 3-year old or 4-year old. She got to go to Dr. Beans, who was a psychiatrist. And, she might have been, I think she was put on meds at that young of an age, even. But,
Wow,
she's never had the right kind of help yet.
I believe it. And then there comes the controversy of putting children on meds. And I don't want to go there today, but we could. And what
Mm.
I know though is what we're talking about is neglect. And I think for me, you raised a really good point. Neglect is not seeable. It is but it is ever so much feelable. So, here's neglect. Here's an example. My family would leave me alone. I was the youngest. I don't know why they wouldn't take me someplace. Maybe I wasn't, it was something that I don't know, maybe they were going to a movie or something and I was too young. They just leave me at the house. I'm young. That was scary because the house was scary. It had memories of abuse in it. And no one ever stopped to think, is it appropriate to leave a 4-year-old child alone? Is it appropriate to leave a 6-year-old child alone? Is it appropriate? What might be going on with the child? And because I lived in neglect and abuse, I didn't know I had a right to say, I'm scared because I wasn't supposed to express any feeling. So they would just leave. And I had not a routine, but I had a thing that I would do. I would go to all the scary places. I wrote about this in my book. I would go to the top of the basement stairs. I'd turn on all the lights and I'd get tough. I'd be like a squirrel that puts its tail up behind its head so it looks big and bushy.
Big
I'd get
fat
tough,
thing.
I'd puff up, and I'd say, all right, don't you dare come up the stairs. You stay down there because I'm tough and you don't mess with me. I mean, like I was doing all this posing. And at the same time, I had my eye on the back door and my eye on the front door, and those lights were beaming on too. So that if I had to run and escape, if any demons or awful things came up the stairs from the basement, which was a dirt floor, it was scary.
Wow.
Yeah, it was scary. And that's where my father kept his tools. And it was a very manly place. And it was, not safe at all. It's like hatchets and saws and all of that stuff and belts, which we were smacked around with. It was scary. So that's how I dealt with neglect. One, I didn't tell anybody about it. Two, I expected it. Three, and here's the phrase that psychologists use, I got grandiose. Grandiosity is when a child takes on this powerful role. It's like parentification. A child acts as if she's a whole lot bigger and stronger than she really is. And that I didn't know that's what I was doing, but it's what pumped me up because the adrenaline that I felt when I was raising my voice and saying, don't you dare come up the stairs. I was being now I'm not saying I was abuser, but I was the angry one. I was the one to be dealt with. And that gave me some energy for a short time.
And a
But
sense of power.
yeah, false power, but it was there.
Right.
Neglect hurts. Do you think what kind of long-term effect does neglect have on a traumatized child?
Well, I think, just like we've been talking about, self-care is hard. We have to make ourselves self-care.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have to value that and, encourage ourselves, talk to ourselves, make sure we're doing it.
And I agree with you. And I think one of the toughest things, Denise, and this comes from um, a textbook on how adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families can survive. And it says the solution to being a traumatized child is to become your own loving parent. Now that makes logical sense to me, but has taken me years to say, how the hell can I be a loving
Right.
parent?
It's hard to figure out
What
what
is
to,
that?
you didn't have the example.
Never had an example. And then
But
behind that, yeah.
sometimes I would be at my friend's house and would see how their parents loved them. And
Mm,
so, and I'd be like, wow, that's something. So we did have examples in our lives of a loving parent, but yeah,
On occasion we did, but it was not. Here was the thing for me. My first thing was to say, I don't know what being a loving parent is. I didn't see it. But I have also devoted a lot of my life to witnessing parents who are being loving with their children. And I'm like a cinematographer. I'm like, my brain is filming that so I can keep it inside myself. Oh my God, look how this parent is being with this child. The second
yes,
thing I need to say is behind saying I don't know what I didn't experience what a loving parent was like is the rage and the anger that I had that I didn't get at childhood. And so for me to say, oh, I'm supposed to now take care of myself and being a loving parent, come on, that's what I need. I need that. What I'm supposed to be all things to all people again. No, that's the way I was raised, a parentified child. What are you talking about? And it has taken me a long time to own that rage and that sorrow. And one of the writers that I really respect, Tony A, doesn't use his last name because he was in 12-step programs, but he says, every traumatized child, every adult child of an alcoholic has within us a ball of rage and a wound of sorrow. Ball of rage, wound of sorrow. And I'm so grateful he said that because it said, Holly Elissa, you have a right to be enraged. You have a right to be enraged. If somebody says, become your own loving parent, you have a right to say, what? What? Come on, that's what I need. Now I'm supposed to do that for myself? Come on. And then the second thing is the wound of sorrow. What sadness I have. People often ask me, when you see children being loved, does that hurt? And I say to them, I love seeing children being loved. And yes, I feel a sadness often for the children that I know that weren't loved, beginning with myself. So it's always a both end. I remember the time I wrote about this in my book. I was brushing my daughter's hair, and she's from Korea, and she had this beautiful long black hair, and she was leaning. My knees were like this, and she was leaning back on my knees, and her head was back, and it was just a beautiful thing. I was stroking her hair and stroking her hair. I was just loving on her. Just loving on her. And in the midst of it, I almost froze because I said, oh my God, I'm not supposed to know how to do this. No one ever did this for me. How do I know that this feels so good? And if I had let my thoughts go, I would have remembered my mother pulling my hair or my mother pushing my head down. Back in the day, she would wash our hair in the kitchen sink.
yes.
And she was angry. She'd push my head around. She'd turn the water on too hot. I mean, it was scary. It was scary. And here I am doing this loving thing with my daughter. And I went through this whole flip-de-doodle inside of myself saying, Holly Elissa, it's okay. It's okay. And this was way before, this was like 28 years ago before I knew as much about recovery as I know and trauma as I knew now. But I just said, it's okay, sweetheart. She's loving this. It's honoring her. I'm loving this. It's bonding. But there was that rupture, the momentary rupture, saying to myself, yeah, I was neglected. What do I do with that in this moment?
Parenting hard.
Hard. Hard. And I remember that moment. I remember a number of moments where I was stopped in the middle of doing something. And I realized I choose not to do this the way I was raised.
Right.
Or I remember one time I was with my daughter, she was like 2 or 3, and we were in a bathroom, one of those old fashioned bathrooms like they had in New York City from the 1930s, where it was like black and white tiles, little black and white tiles. And she was making up a game of hopping on the black ones. And so I stayed with her and we hopped on the black ones, and other people were coming and going in the basement. We were just doing it. She found something she loved and we were doing it. I was talking with her about it. And somebody said to me, "You are such a loving mother to let your child do that." I said, "Thank you." It just felt natural.
Right.
Was that something that happened with me? No. But that's where my daughter wanted to go in that moment. And I got it. It's like you did that for years, right? You see children playing and you jump right in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I gave myself a happy childhood at my classroom.
Yeah. So, sweetie, what would you say to people about neglect, especially the adults now who are like us? We had neglect, it affected us. How can we be with ourselves given the neglect today?
Neglect is going to be, if there was other types of abuse, you know it and recognize it and have worked on it potentially to heal it or to help yourself be well around it. But neglect, it it's kind of hidden, it's deeper, it's about emotional and self-love. And you got to work at it, I think.
So, sweetie, have you felt, and you, of course, don't ever have to answer these questions, but I'm just wondering, have you felt what it was like? Have you felt recently neglect? Just remembered what it's like to feel neglected as an adult?
Um, well, the other day I had a really hard time figuring out what to cook, what I wanted to eat. And I went through
Yeah.
the whole day trying to figure out I had food, I had different foods. Well, I had different ingredients.
Mhm. Yeah. You had
And
choices.
right. But I could not figure out what I wanted to eat. And it took me the whole day. I ended up having little snacks. But then then actually it was the next day that I finally cooked myself something, made something. But like I would have a spoonful of peanut butter or a handful of nuts or a piece of toast, but I really had a hard time. And I did not relate that at the time to neglect, but it is self neglect to not feed yourself.
And does that, if you were to, and you don't have to, but if you were to reflect, does that remind you of anything that you experienced as a child?
Well, like sometimes we didn't have meals, we had cereal for supper.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so there were not choices, even.
And as a growing child, you needed more
Right.
than cereal. Agreed. Or when I was punished, I was sent to my room without supper, double punishment.
Right.
Yeah, I think the threat of not belonging, not being wanted is as powerful as the threat of violence because they're both of those, neglect and abuse, are the threat of emotional dredging. And I want to say today that I'm having a hard time, and I didn't know why I was having a hard time. I had trouble sleeping last night. I'm struggling today, and I ate chocolate last night. From 30 years ago or something on PBS was Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell doing a program about the hero's journey, which mattered to me years ago. And I just stayed up and watched it at like 2, 3 in the morning. I'm watching this thing. And then they had all the PBS, raising money stuff in between. And, but that was what I focused on. And then it took me a long time to realize today's March 3rd. March 3rd would have been my sister's 84th birthday.
Wow.
My oldest sister, Karen Jeanette Bruner, she died of an ACEs caused death. if adverse childhood experiences lead to certain types of illnesses. Karen got an autoimmune disease. In fact, she had autoimmune troubles her whole life. And that's one of the things that trauma surviving kids, abused children, neglected children get is our immune systems are not as strong. Why do you think that's true?
What we believe about ourselves,
Mm-hmm. That's a good
basically.
point. If I believe I'm not worth it, then I'm always in stress. I'm always like protecting myself. It's you often use the term hypervigilant.
Right,
If I'm always looking around, that takes up a lot of stores of energy.
right. And if I don't feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
that takes energy.
I think safety is key here because that is the common, sadly, the common factor that all traumatized children and adults have. We don't feel safe in our own skin. We don't feel safe in our own environments. We don't feel safe with people. And that wrecks our immune system. Karen was always getting some kind of allergy or some kind of like her eyes were all, gunky with stuff. I mean, she got
I had allergies, yep, my whole life.
really,
Yeah.
wow. Did you get
Worse,
attention for them? Did anybody
worse
help you
when I
with
was
it?
a kid. No, they didn't give me medicine. I was allergic to grass. They'd make me
Oh,
go cut the grass.
oh my God. They made you cut the grass and you'd be breathing in. Oh, that's
It'd be
awful.
all,
I'm sorry.
I didn't learn till I was an adult about Benadryl and, you know,
Right.
take how to take care of your allergies because I never really got treatment.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I used to step on bees every year because it was as soon as school was out, I'd take my shoes off and I would run barefoot. Now, running barefooted, there's been early childhood publications about this. It's a good thing. It helps our
Right.
balance, but it means I'm going to step on a bee. And every season, I would step on a bee and I was allergic. My foot would swell up like a football. It
Me
would
too.
hurt. You too? And what was
Yeah.
it like?
I got stung in the face. One time I got stung riding my bike right here in the middle of my forehead. Both my eyes swelled shut. Yeah, I was
Oh
swollen
my
all
God.
summer.
Oh my God, that's scary.
I
I'm
didn't
so
get anaphylactic shock or, my throat didn't swell up, but wherever I was bit, it would swell up and hot and horrible.
sometimes it was so swollen, it was itchy.
Itchy. Yep.
Oh, it was awful. And I just learned as a young kid to starting at age 4, maybe even age 3, I learned to just live with it.
Right.
There was no help for it. Bees were going to sting. Just live with it. And that was neglect. If a
Right.
parent had taken us to the doctor and said, look, she's got what's really seems to be an allergic reaction here, and it happens every spring. Can we prevent this or help her with this? That would have made a difference. I tell you, the only time when I got help with it was when during the polio epidemic, which I guess I was 5 years old, and we all got sent out to live with a relative that was way out in the country. Not that my city was a big city, it was like 18,000, but somehow I got farmed out to stay with this cousin of mine that was close to my age. And we were out picking blackberries. And I walked into this blackberry place because I was real good at knowing where the blackberries were. I could smell them, whatever, like a dog. Anyway, I walked in and I walked into a bee's nest, or I think it was a hornet's nest. And they came at me zoom, zoom, zoom. It was hurting I mean, it was like I ran out and my aunt Janet said to me, come right over here. She took me to where there was a mud puddle and she splattered mud on each one of those stings, and they were all over me. And that was so healing to me.
Soothing. Right.
It was soothing. Oh, thank you, sweetie. Two things happened. Number one, somebody noticed I was in pain.
Right.
they gave me help, and then the help actually worked. And honestly, even if there wasn't something helpful in the mud, it was just somebody seeing me, paying attention to me, and seeing that I was hurting that made all the difference.
Right, the mud is soothing.
Yeah, and it must have drawn out some of the sting,
Yeah, that
but it
happened to
was,
me at Mishfest when I was an adult. I got too many mosquito bites.
uh,
I was like past the line of demarcation. I was like beyond help. So I went to
yeah.
the womb. They had a medic area where you could get tea and whatnot. They put me up on a massage table and slathered me with green clay.
Oh, wow.
It was so good. Oh,
Uh,
saved me.
oh,
Clay,
that's
mud,
so
it
good.
helps. It draws
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah. So what we're talking about here, and I think that means we have to wrap, is
Right.
let me check my time too. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. Let's look at how we can pull this together and what we're taking away from our conversation, and invite people who are listening during or after the fact. If our theme became neglect, what did you hear today that might have helped you? Or what did you hear today that might have rung true for you? And if the theme of neglect wasn't your theme, what else did you hear in our conversation or our sharing that you might want to talk about more? Or that said to you, yeah, I'm a trauma survivor. Yeah, I need help with this. Denise, do you want to start us out with that, or let me know if you want me to start?
Go ahead. You start.
Okay.
I don't really have a answer.
Okay, well, let me go to the thing that's on my heart. In my family, we didn't mention when people died. We didn't grieve when people died. We didn't acknowledge it. I was never taken to a funeral. I was an adult in my 30s before I went to a funeral on my own by choice. Now, I went because two of my high school classmates, one of them murdered the other one. I'm like 16 years old. I went to that funeral and had panic attacks all through it. But why I'm saying this is because I have mourned the loss of my sister. But on this day, the anniversary of her birth, I'm sad. I'm sad for her. I'm sad that she died in the horrible way that she did. I'm sad for so much of her life. She had amnesia, dissociative amnesia, couldn't remember anything about our childhood, and would say to me, what, I don't remember anything. What happened? And so I have a lot of sorrow around my sister. And that's something that if I weren't a trauma survivor, I wouldn't have, I might still feel sad about her leaving, but I wouldn't feel so sad that her life was such a tragedy, an unmet promise. She was perfect, but her life was an unmet promise. I don't think she ever felt like she was really worthy. So neglect, she was more neglected than abused. She was the hero daughter. She was the one that was the golden haired girl. And so but she was neglected too. Um, so yeah, sorrow. I have sorrow. And that comes in large part from neglect and not learning how to grieve. So today, after we're done, I will take care of myself and take some time to honor my sister's life.
Light her a candle.
Mm-hmm. I shall do that. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's my take on neglect right now. How about you, sweetie? Have you had time to?
It's to me, I just think it's a very hard one to figure out. That's really has taken the longest to remedy within myself to
Mm-hmm.
make, to practice self-care regularly.
Mm-hmm. So let's end with this. What's a way in which you took care of yourself today that you feel good about?
Today I cooked spaghetti, my favorite food, and it's actually in the kitchen still cooking right now,
And you can
and I
smell
can't
it.
wait to have some, right?
Do you share that with your housemate?
I do when I cook, 'cause when I cook soup or spaghetti or something, I make a big pot, and
Mm.
so yeah, I do share it.
Wow, that's very sweet. Very sweet. So there you have. You've taken care of yourself, and I'm taking care of myself in a different way by telling the truth about my sadness, about my sister, and by committing right now to devoting the time to grieving her and to saying again goodbye to her. So let us meet next week,
Three
same time.
o'clock.
3 p.m. if you're on the East Coast of the US. And maybe Denise and I will take time. I haven't done this recently to take time to send out on our social media places how you can tune in,
Oh,
how you can
right,
tune in advance, because we haven't been doing that. And it's really a lot of, how can I say, it's inspiring for the two of us when somebody joins us.
right.
I keep hearing from people that have joined us in the past. And so we'd love you to join us if that's something that feels right for you. But if being there with us, listening is what works for you, amen.
Yep.
Amen. So Denise, thank you so much for helping me find my way home. And I hope I did the same with you.
Thank you. Yes.
Fairly well, my friend.
Wish you well.
Yes, wish you well. Okay, let me stop the
Recording.
recording.